My name is Richard Swatton, and I've been an astrologer for over 2/3 of my lifetime. And welcome to this review of the sun signs. My intention, however, is to try and get beneath the signs, within them, look at the structural processes operating, because the signs of the zodiac are more than a list of correspondences or character associations or particular forms of behavior. Those are interesting, and they were noted very well in the 1970s with Linda Goodman's sun signs. How to spot an Aries, how to spot a Leo, how to spot a particular sign. Certain characteristics are indeed entertaining. But what I'm interested in is looking at the root principles of the sign, the ordering processes. The signs really start off by taking the qualities of the seasons, because the zodiac as a whole is actually a tale, a story of an ordering process. And each one of the signs has a specific thing to say in the overall cycle of the year. We could say that the signs are the seasonal moods, and each season passes through 3 stages. There are 4 seasons, and so therefore this is obviously relating to the 12 signs. Each sign has an image, but in that image is condensed a whole variety of things, from mythic associations, ancient wisdom traditions. Each sign has a response mechanism and a type of behavior that goes with it. It's as if it reacts to life in a particular way. And you could also see the signs perhaps as a particular tint or a mode of perception through which people look. And so when they're seeing, they kind of select things from the world through their sun sign because they have an affinity with it. It reflects them in some way. The signs are an embodiment of nature, and so they don't just operate in the human vehicle, they operate everywhere. The signs also have an innate ordering principle, a teleology, an intent or a purpose to them. These are a tale to be told. It's as if there is, as I say, a developing process in each sign that the sun sign in particular will show what this ordering process is. When we become our sun sign, what we become is more connected to our individual purpose. The word purpose is interesting in this regard. It means finding one's own place. Psychologically, it means finding one's identity, one's will to live, and then put that out with intent, radiating from a center of which the sign expresses when the sun is within it. The symbol of the sun is quite obvious, really. It's the central planet. Astrologers call the sun and the moon and all of the other planets, just for convenience. But it's the central ordering principle around which all of the others revolve. The sun in the sign, therefore, gives us an idea about this central ordering principle and the pattern of unfoldment around the rest. So if you can see the zodiac as a kind of cake with lots of candles on it, the sun is the brightest candle, the one that makes most sense. It brings it all together. If we lose touch with our sun sign, our sense of individuality, our sense of purpose, our sense of direction, or the will to live, as Alan Leo called it, he called the sun the life bringer, then we have a sense of chaos, purposeless direction, and a kind of just sinking into the flow of different instincts and feelings and needs, all without a kind of central symbol. The images of the sun are quite a few, from the father to the president, the king of a country, the pharaoh indeed. In fact, the ancient civilizations of Egypt revolved around this center of the sun, the main deity. The sun however, is just the carrier of consciousness, just as the king was thought to be the supreme container of a kind of ordering principle in the state. As Apollo, the sun god, he is the father principle, the breaker of curses, the bringer of civilization, of prophecy, and he brings music. As a kind of champion or a hero, he's a very important character in the Greek pantheon. Helios, though, has a very important principle too to bring into operation here. Helios is just the carrier of the sun. In other words, what he represents is similar to what our psychology is. Our psychology carries consciousness in a particular form, but it isn't actually consciousness itself. So the sun, although it radiates and illumines our life and brings purpose and meaning to it, it isn't consciousness itself. It's just the awareness of our own unique and individual path that is portrayed throughout the sun sign itself, and therefore will lead us to a sense of unique and individual destiny. Aries is noted as the first sign of the zodiac. It starts the whole seasonal cycle off with like a kick or a punch or a push forward into life. It's as if it imbues what was the barren wastes of winter, and it imbues it with fresh new life. The symbol of the ram, however, has an ancient correlation going right back into Egyptian and Babylonian mythology. In fact, it goes right back to also Chaldean and Sumerian myth as the god Ze, who was the essence of life. But the ram-headed deities of ancient Egypt were worshipped as being a representation of the sun itself. We've talked about the sun before, but the ram head, the ram itself, the word ram actually means God, the supreme, the one, the single divine deity. In Egyptian mythology, this was known as Amun or Amun, and he is called the hidden one, the hidden god of the wind, the heat which rises and makes the wind move over the sands. He is that which inspires life. He is that which gets behind life as if, and it expresses a kind of unique quality. It's visible but not visible. It's only visible within the manifest experience of life, but behind it there is a mover. What the Renaissance astrologers called the primum mobile, the prime mover of life. Behind the stars, in fact, that they looked out on, they believed that behind that was a massive sun, and that the stars were pinpricks in the darkness, and that massive sun was the empyrean, the force of nature, the force of fire, emanating out, radiating out its life. We have to have the stars there in order to illumine this bigger life force, but if the whole backdrop was taken out, it would burn us. This is the symbolic association with fire, Aries the ram, the principle of a unique and distinct energy which forces itself through spring and is observable in the rising sap, the vivid greens, the feeling of agitation. People want to come out of their hibernation. They want to move ahead into life. They have future battles to fight, things to get on with, ambitions to achieve, arguments to have. Typical of Aries is if nothing's going on, then they'll form an argument in order to make something happen. Famous astrologer Dane Rudhyar, he was himself an Aries, I think summarizes the principle in this sign as the power of release. It's the thing which starts things off, and he describes Aries as wanting to be an act of potency, an act that makes things happen, that moves the inert forces of life forward. This is the principle in the sign that each Aries will, in their own way, embody. Aries is present within the act itself. It's the sense that they can move, that they can be effective, they can be potent, they can initiate action. This also is an inspiration to other people. Many Aries later on in life become mentors or father figures. Underneath, of course, unless they have a disciplined existence, at first this Aries energy can be rather wild. It can become boastful, daring do, the adolescent daring to do things which actually can get itself in trouble. This is the innate flaw of the sign, in fact. But we will come to that in a moment and later. So here we have then a sign which represents the spiritual essence of life itself. Movement, forward progression, energy. If it lacks, if it doesn't have sexual heat, if it isn't erect, potent and forceful, then it's not being itself. Sometimes, however, it's an interesting line of thought with Aries that it can become lazy because it just wants things to happen by themselves. Sometimes it can't be bothered to do. It just should happen. But that's a very rare Aries. Occasionally other facets of the horoscope will come into play here. Essentially, therefore, we have the embodiment of the force of the sun, the ram which butts into things, creates arguments, dislikes crowds. It needs the force of movement, an impetuous spirit to carry it on and to carry it forward into life to make things happen. The psychology of the sign is fairly easy to understand. With its need for potency, we have two basic urges in life. The need to be effective, potent, active, and the will and the desire to live life to the full. The trouble in the sign is that sometimes it just doesn't have the patience to do this, and so therefore this must be counteracted in some sense by a kind of imposition of a restraint. Now, provided Aries is making things happen and moving forward and directing its life with purpose and intent, then we find the happy Aries. Things get going, people are motivated, there's a surge, in other words, in the identity, a kind of motivating force to, as I say, make things happen, get things done, do things. So the psychology of the sign has an impetuosity, an earnestness and a desire. The unhappy Aries turns up when there is a constraint put on that. This is the problem that fire has with the earth signs. Earth represents pragmatism, things embodied, form. Aries can't be bothered with that, which is what I was trying to talk about in terms of its laziness sometimes. You know, it takes time to get from one place to another. It isn't that pragmatic sign because it is a sign of inspiration. It is fired by its imagination. It's fired by the excitement, the thrill of the chase, rather than actually the goal. As I say, it lives through the act of making things happen rather than any particular goal. So therefore, this sign has an inherent flaw in it. It can easily get bored, and boredom is the danger zone for this sign. Early on in life, it's often been the case, and in Aries, both with men and women, is that there has been some trouble with the guiding principle of life, with the guiding authority figure, usually the father, or sometimes the mother. This is because somehow there is something in the pattern of the sign which it wants to upset things. It's if there needs to draw blood or have some kind of pain or conflict in it, inherent within it, because otherwise you don't know you're alive. That's why conflict, competition, and the championing of a cause is very important for the sign. If they don't have that cause to live by or to do or to champion, what happens is they create one. They fall over, they berate themselves for not being perfect, for not speaking the truth, for not being, in effect, potent and effective. That was the myth of Jason. Jason, the champion who went to obtain the golden fleece. It's a tale worth reviewing if you want to look at the depth of the sign. It could be noted in Liz Green's book, The Astrology of Fate, in the section on myth and the signs of the zodiac. Jason eventually got his prize, but he made a connection and was an involvement with a very strong, powerful character called Medea, who was a feminine figure he fell in love with. Unfortunately, when he took her back, they had children, but he got bored. The boredom of sterility, the sameness, the embodiment of everything ordinary. That's why Aries is often the maverick, and why Isabel Pagan called this sign the sign of the pioneer, that which is new, that which is fresh. So the flaw in the sign is that whenever things get too sterile, too samey, too rigid, too ordinary, there's this kind of character in them which always upsets the apple cart somewhere. They don't like to take orders. There's a problem with the father figure in the background of the sign, as it is with Leo and Capricorn, which we shall meet as we continue on through this journey of the signs. But this is about competitive battle, the will to live. There needs to be some danger, some daring do, some activity which risks life, and so therefore puts you on the edge of a kind of urgency to do something. Aries psychology is fraught sometimes with brutality of an inward kind as well as an outer. He can be a bully, following the Greek symbol of Aries, which is Aries himself, who was a bully with a large sword. Or he can be a samurai warrior type who places his sword very carefully and with skill and precision. It's the cut, the precise cut that sometimes Aries have, if provided they can channel their energy into a constructive, self-disciplined way. But not for too long. Aries can't be held down for too long. The disruptive force of fire wants to consume. It wants to envelop and then get on to the next thing. So, the psychology of the assigned is quite tricky to deal with, and in many ways embodies the spirit of life itself, but also its destructive power. Finding a balance between the two is very important for the sign in order to lead a reasonably balanced life. There are a few other features of the sign I'd like to mention before we move on to a conclusion. The cosmic ideal of the sign, the thing that running through it that often motivates from beneath, whether one is conscious or not of it, is that Aries is the champion of everybody's individual right to exist as him or herself. It is that force in nature which takes a unique specimen of life, whether it's a seed, a plant, an animal, or a human being, and it then says, I'm going to assert the individuality of this condition. Now, this can be a very difficult thing when it comes to relating, because relating, as we mentioned in the myth of Jason, can become boring or sterile. And so often you find in the lives of especially young Arians, both men and women, is the penchant for triangles. Relationship triangles, rivalries come into existence, and often there has been, as I say, a problem in the early home between rivals. Many times have I seen Aries come from backgrounds where there was a rival for the mother or a rival for the father, or the penetration of a new, fresh face into it. Perhaps also to do with brothers and sisters. That's the first thing. So one must remember that life is unfolding as a sense of need to express this cosmic principle of individuality, and sometimes that can ride rough over norm or decorum. Second thing is whether Aries becomes a rebel with a cause or without a cause. A rebel without a cause becomes a kind of renegade, a person that is often brave and often courageous, but always has something to fight. Always has something to fight just for the simple act of fighting. And this can lead, unfortunately, to an extended sense of pride, a kind of priapic inflation of one's own self-importance. And it's very important to come down from that inflation, otherwise you'll get into one too many fights, one too many scrapes, one too many accidents, and then the last one, like Jason, you'll see the timber falling from the boat that he built. Aries also has a quality of innocence about it, rather like the young child or infant needy for something or another. The desirous nature can sometimes overpower self-control. And it is always this bridge, this balance, should I say, between self-control, self-restraint and excitement and the desire to make things happen, which needs to be somehow balanced. Now, I'd like to mention also something here about what's gone on in the past few years and what will be coming up slightly in the future. It's because the planet of Uranus has been in the sign of Aries now for at least 2 or 3 years. And it's around about the mid sign, around about 18, 20 degrees of a sign, which is all those people born around, say, the 10th, 13th of April. And for those people, there has been a need to break away from the past, to upset the apple cart. When Uranus is in a sign, which is the planet of progression, and it's the planet which is actively against the status quo, these two planets, in fact, can join in their kind of united, into a united front. So there is a sense in which things have been broken down and things are starting to be renewed. And Aries needn't get too problematic about this. Something in their life needs to change for the best, because the status quo has been too restraining upon the innate character and the development of the individual. And so, in conclusion, we must always remember that astrology alone will never tell us ultimately what we make of the pattern itself. Whether we find some constructive form for it or whether we move towards some of its shadowy elements. Its shadowy elements being things we've already covered, which is to do with a kind of constant annoyance and a combative spirit against those forces which threaten its capacity to do and to be and to become. Or whether we manage to put some kind of constructive form on this animalistic vitality, this penetrative spirit of life which seeks to ever thrust, to make things happen, to push out into life and to make it come alive with thrill and excitement. Those are the qualities of Aries. Which side we come down on really isn't dependent on astrology. That is dependent on our capacity to choose. And our capacity to choose is always dependent on the level of consciousness we bring to our own lives, our own natures, how much self-understanding we have. But come what may, whichever form is ultimately expressed, Aries energy is always the same. Always it is the champion of the cause of independent existence. Independence being a principally important element in the sign to fulfill and to express. And if he can do this in some constructive, self-expressive way, then he becomes an inspiration, not only to himself, but to other people as well.